Hi everyone, Stepan here. In today's video I'm going to be covering traps in the King's Gambit, and once again I would like to ask you to comment below answer the question from the previous video, which traps would you like to see covered in which opening. Okay, I've put on this little tab from Lichess so that you can see which move we are on, so that it makes it easier to follow. Also, you can try to copy moves in your own databases or something. If you'd like a study for all the traps, you can find it on my Patreon page. Okay, the first thing I should say, there are two disclaimers. Firstly, I haven't covered all the traps in the King's Gambit because they are basically countless, as opposed to all other sound openings, and let's call the King's Gambit sound for now. Basically, in every variation of the King's Gambit, there are 5 or 6 tricky moves which could happen and trap your opponent in some way. So I tried to limit the traps to something that could happen in real games. And the second disclaimer is some of the traps are unsound. Some of them basically give your opponent a +3, +4 advantage and they lose by force, but it's not easy to figure out why. Okay, and also, lastly, before we begin, please, if you know any traps that fit all the categories I mentioned and I haven't covered them, please just paste the PGN in the comments or message me on Lichess or whatever, and I will try composing part 2 of this video, because basically there are probably 100 traps that could be in here. Okay, we're going to start with one of my favorites, if not my favorite, and this one is absolutely sound. It happened in Alekhine's game or Alekhine's game in 1911, and it starts in the King's Gambit declined. So after bishop c5, knight to f3 is the most normal move, pawn to d6, knight to c3. This is the main line that's played today, and there are hundreds of Grandmaster games in this line, and that's why it's highly likely this could happen in tournament games. And by the way, when I started studying the King's Gambit, long after I've recorded the series on it, which if you haven't seen, you should see it before this, I was looking forward to playing this in a tournament game, but I never got enough courage to actually play the King's Gambit in a tournament game. So if you're less of a coward than I am, this is going to be very useful, because this is very likely to happen. Okay, knight f6. Bishop c4, we are still following the main line. There are some deviations, but I don't want to waste time on that now. Knight c6, d3, bishop g4, this is all still very normal. And knight a4 is the main move. And in this position, Grandmasters today play bishop to b6. And after bishop to b6, the game should be about equal. But ef4 is okay. ef4 is still pretty close to equal, and there is basically not much wrong with the move. And in this position, Alekhine played knight c5, just grabbing the bishop pair, and after dc5, he took on f4. Okay, his opponent played a weird move here. You could play a couple of normal moves, which you could even take on f3 and be fine. Not that it's a good move. You could castle, you could play queen e7, queen d7. His opponent played knight h5, going for the bishop pair, and this is problematic because of bishop e3. It's a simple attack on the pawn on c5. Still, if you want to have a normal game, you can defend the pawn, you can do whatever. But this next blunder made this game extremely famous, and it's one of my favorite queen sacrifices because it's absolutely forced. And after the next move, white is winning. Black played knight e5, trying to get the bishop pair back and also maybe ruining the pawn structure on the king side. Probably just taking on c4 was the idea. His opponent was unknown, at least I haven't heard of him. And now the queen sacrifice. Knight takes e5, and this is forced. It's all forced. If you don't take the queen, then you're just down a knight, and you're going to lose a bishop as well if you move your bishop somewhere, or you're going to lose another piece. So bishop takes d1. And now bishop takes f7, check. And again, this could happen in your games. There are two options, king f8 and king e7. King f8 is easier to refute, I think. If you play king f8, then white simply castles. You don't take this bishop. And if, well, you are threatening a ton of discoveries here, so let's assume knight f6. This is the best move. Just bishop c5, and black has to give up the queen. There is no other move. And after king e7, which is what happened in the game, again bishop c5, this is forced, king to f6, you can castle, you can play king f1, rook f1, excuse me, the point is to get the rook into the game. Alekhine castled in the game, and now it's basically forced mate, whatever happens. If you take on e5, then it's mate in 1 with rook f5, because the bishops cover all the squares. If you play king g5, that's a bit more resistant, but now bishop e3. And again, this is going to lead to mate, king h4, and after rook f5, you're threatening mate on h5, and you're threatening mate on f2. So let's say g6, preventing one of them, just bishop f2. And after knight g3, you can take with the pawn, or with the bishop, both win. So this, I would say, is the most theoretical trap, and it comes from the most theoretical position. I think it's extremely likely to have this on the board if you play the King's Gambit. By the way, yeah, as you can see it on the screen, his opponent's name is Stenner. I don't know. There's a theory that this actually wasn't a game, but that it was analysis of their game that ended in a draw. I don't know. Could be. Okay, the next trap is insane. This comes from the Ghulam-Kassim Gambit, which is an opening I've never heard of before I started researching for this video. Okay, so in this position, ef4, we are looking at the King's Gambit accepted, and I don't know if you can see the number of games here. Okay, you cannot. Knight f3, which is the main move, g5, this is the main line, which if you play the King's Gambit you are familiar with. And in this position, g4, which is again one of the main moves. And here, usually white castles, and that's a lot of games. Knight e5 can be played. But in this game, in this position, Zimmer, which is a game this became famous in, played pawn to d4. And this is called the Ghulam-Kassim Gambit. Now this position is almost completely unsound. Black is -3, -4, -5, but if you try to defend that with black, it's almost impossible. At least I couldn't, unless I've prepared the position in advance. So this is a great idea. Because it comes from one of the main lines in the King's Gambit accepted, you probably could have this on the board at least 2 out of 10 games. If you choose to play d4, of course, in this position. So let's say gf3. Okay, they take the knight, that's the point. And in this position, it's actually more common to play queen takes f3, and this was actually played by Alexander Fier. He is the highest rated. Well, actually, there's another grandmaster who played this, but Fier is the. I'm looking for a word different than celebrity. He's not a celebrity. He's the most known grandmaster who played this. Celebrity. Okay, but we are looking at castles, which is even riskier for white, but stronger if black makes a mistake. Now, the way to play this position for black to keep equality and to stay in the game and to have an advantage potentially is completely engine-like. Like, you would have to either spend a ton of time or be prepared or use an engine to find all of these ideas. Now, the only way to play for an advantage for black is to play d5, firstly give up a pawn, which is fine since you're up a piece, and after ed5 to play bishop g4, which again seems really weird, giving up a second pawn with tempo, but after gf3, bishop h3, black should be better. Now if you find this, then you're either really good or you know the position or you are using an engine. But coming back to this position, after gf3, which will happen in all Ghulam-Kassim Gambits, because that's the only way to refute it, and castles, if black makes a very obvious mistake of f takes g2, it's game over. And this is actually what happened in the game Zimmer-Miller. Okay, now bishop takes f7 check, and this is forced. Everything is forced from here on. King takes f7, queen h5. You're getting all of your pieces into play. King g7 was played, rook takes f4, knight f6 was played, queen to g5 was played, king f7, and now simply e5. And at this point, I don't think the engine announces mate yet, but I think it's like plus 10. So for example, in the game bishop g7 was played, but well, there is no other way to defend the knight. So probably everyone would play bishop g7, queen h5, the knight is pinned, king f8, and now rook f6. And after bishop f6, ef6, queen f6, again, most people would play this, simply bishop h6. And in the game, in this position, black resigned. I don't know what to suggest. If you go king e7, I have bishop g5. If you go king g8, I have mate in 2 with queen e8 and queen f8. I think this is absolutely stunning, and if I were playing the King's Gambit in a tournament game in this position, which has occurred many times and is likely to happen, I would go for d4, because after gf3 and castles, if black doesn't know that fg2 loses, then, I mean, white just wins all the games. Okay, let's move on to the next one. This one happens in the knight g5 line in the King's Gambit accepted, which is called the Allgaier Gambit. Now, again, that's very uncommon and could probably confuse your opponents early on, because if you play the King's Gambit, you know stuff, and black has one defense, so they probably don't know a lot. So e4, knight f3, g5, h4. We know this already, so we are not playing for d4. We play knight g5. Okay, the Kieseritzky with knight e5 is way more common, which we are going to have a look at some traps in the Kieseritzky as well. Okay, after knight g5, d5 is the way to sort of punish the opening. And after e d5, queen to e7 check. You go king f2, and there's a way for black to win this position, which I think most people would find. After king f2, white is lost, but it's a good attempt. And it's a trap that's completely unsound, but if your opponent is inexperienced, they shouldn't be able to find the next move. In the game, in one of the games I was looking at, h6 was played, which is not a good move, and it should lose. If black plays g3, it's actually a forced win, and it's a really nice forced win. After king g1, black plays bishop g4, and this bishop cannot be taken. And if you don't take the bishop, you just win a piece after bishop e2. If queen takes g4, then it's forced mate after queen c5, and this white can just keep giving up pieces. So black should be winning in that position. Okay, let's just start from the beginning. So knight g5, d5, this is all very normal. E d5, queen e7. If white wants to avoid risking this line with g3, then white plays queen e2, and white is slightly worse. Close to equal, but slightly worse. I think practically black should be better with these two pawns. But if white plays king f2, then it's either win or lose, and it's win or lose in the next move. If black doesn't play g3, then black has nothing. In the game, as I said, black played h6, and now it's... I don't think it's a forced mate, but almost. Bishop b5 check. You're threatening rook e1. So it's either mate or you win the queen. So king d8 was played in the game, which makes sense, avoiding the loss of your queen and also avoiding checkmate for now. But still, rook e1. Queen c5 check, the only move to save your queen and prevent mate. But after d4, again, you only have one option. You have to take the bishop. If you don't take the bishop, then rook e1, rook e8 is mate. So black took the bishop, and knight f7 check, king d7, and queen takes g4 is checkmate. And this is one of the unsound traps, but in a blitz game, in a bullet game, even in a rapid game, it's not easy to find this mating idea with bishop g4. So again, d5, ed5, queen e7, king f2. If g3, which is not a hard move to find, excuse me, if g3, king g1, black still has to be extremely careful, but not as much. Even if they don't find bishop g4, your rook is not able to come to e1, but you should be able to survive with something like d4. But yeah, if black doesn't find g3, then game over. Okay, the next one is pretty simple, but I think it's very effective. Okay, we are looking at the bishop's gambit in this one, and we're looking at ed5 on move 6. Okay, so ef4, bishop c4, on move 4, excuse me, ed5. In this position, you can play ed5 or bishop d5. Bishop d5 is slightly more popular. After ed5, black continues queen h4, which usually isn't the best idea, but it actually sets up a trap here. So with the bishop still on c4, since white hasn't played bishop to bishop takes d5, your queen is actually attacking the bishop as well. So after d5, if white takes with the bishop, just don't go for that because it doesn't make as much sense. After ed5, queen h4 actually comes with a threat. So g3 of course cannot be played, so king f1. And now we set up a trap with f3. We are attacking the bishop, we are threatening f takes g2. And I don't know what to suggest. Yeah, I should say that f3 is not the best move. Bishop d6, as you can read here, should be played. That's almost a theoretical position. And now what happened in one game, I don't know who played it. I think it was unknown players. White continued queen e1 and just lost immediately. And after queen e1, king e1, you just win the rook. There are other ways to avoid losing your bishop and losing the g2 pawn, and the best one is bishop b5. After bishop b5, the engine says the position is equal and black is not better, like after bishop d6 on move 5, but I would still rather be black. Let's look at the line. So bishop b5 check, bishop d7 just blocking the check, bishop takes, knight takes, and they take on f3. And after something like queen h5 or queen f6 even, and castling queenside, I think I would rather be black. The material is, well, white is still a pawn up, but after queen h5, you're probably going to regain the pawn because they shouldn't have time to defend it. Sometimes white has ideas of d6, sacrificing a pawn, but that shouldn't be as scary. Also, I should mention that after f3, they cannot take here because you take the bishop. So I think this is a nice trap. So after d5 in the bishop's gambit, if they take with the e-pawn, remember that this bishop is loose. This is a common tactical pattern. Okay, next one is by Paul Morphy. I don't know who his opponent is. You can read it here, Bujinsky. I have no idea. I've never heard of him. I know this game from way back, but I don't know his opponent. Again, we are looking at the bishop's gambit, but here we are going to be looking at 4 bishop d5. Okay, Morphy has the black pieces. He continues with knight f6, which is fine. Knight c3 is all normal stuff. And bishop to b4. Now here, people play knight f3. And knight f3 is played to prevent any queen infiltrations. You want to castle. It's a theoretical move, and it has happened many times. Now, his opponent, obviously not a strong player, played pawn to d3. Now the knight is pinned. Therefore, you can grab this bishop without white being able to recapture. And that opens up the e-file. So I think that's very scary, and many weaker players could play d3 in this position. Again, after bishop b4, which is a theoretical position, it takes one mistake, which is natural, to have a big advantage with black. Morphy continued knight d5, e d5, and simply castles, preparing to either win this pawn. If, for example, knight f3, you can play queen d5. Or you can play bishop g4, I'm not sure which is better. But his opponent, again, played a normal move a weaker player would play. He tried to defend his pawn. And now rook e8. Knight e2, the only way to defend if you don't want to misplace your king. Bishop c3, the knight is pinned. So he undefended the knight on e2 once more. bc is forced. Queen h4 check. Queen f2 is correct, and white should be slightly better, I think, after queen f2, because black really has to retreat the queen and then still has to develop his pieces. White is a pawn up. Well, white isn't a pawn up, but I think the f4 pawn is going to drop almost immediately after queen f2. So, for example, bishop takes f4. But his opponent played g3, and now, which again, a weaker player could play g3. It's not that it couldn't happen. And bishop g4 ends the game. I think his opponent resigned here, although I'm not sure. There are two versions of the game which I managed to find. Now, if king f2, trying to basically swap queens, it doesn't work because you take on e2 first. And if king takes, you take the queen with check. And if queen takes, you don't take the queen, giving up your own queen with equal material. You play fg3 check. And after hg3, you don't take the rook because they take your bishop. You play queen f6 and win a whole queen. And after bishop g4, if gh4, then bishop takes f3, and this is hanging twice, this is hanging, so I don't know what to suggest, everything loses. So this again is something that could happen. This is one of the main lines in the bishop's gambit, and if they go d3, grab the bishop castle, threaten rook e8, and I mean, you're not winning, but you have an advantage. Excuse me. Okay, the next trap I want to show you is by Greco from 1600 or the 1600s. And if you look for King's Gambit traps, you can find, I want to say, 10 games played by him. Which are under 15 moves. Not that all of them are traps, but all of them are pretty quick wins. And here we are looking at the Salvio Gambit. Okay, so ef4, knight f3, g5, bishop c4, g4, and knight e5. Okay, now in this position, the correct way to play is queen h4. That should be said immediately. And this I actually found in a book. This game I found in a book, but I don't remember the name of the book. And I remember I found it in a book because it gave an inferior continuation. There's an even quicker way to win than what happened in the game. Okay, so in this game, knight h6 was played. And knight h6 is an okay move. The position should be about equal. Seems to defend the pawn somehow. And if white castles, white is okay. He is going to play d4 and take the pawn on f4. If white grabs the pawn, it's over. Because this bishop is loose, this knight will be loose after the d-pawn moves, and sometimes the queen is going to be trapped if you take the knight. So queen h4 was played in the game, and it should be close to winning. Queen h4 check. After queen h4 check, knight f2 trying to defend, you go d5. And if e d5, then knight g4. And should be better for black, not winning, but... And this is the reason queen h4 isn't precise. And if bishop d5, then of course bishop g4. This is what happened in the game, which is why the book says queen h4 completely winning. But I'm not sure about that. After d5, e d5... You have to start putting pressure on the knight. He defends. You move the king away. You should be able to win, but it's not that clear. But in this position, if they take the pawn on g4, you don't play queen h4, you play d5. And this is incredible. If bishop d5, that's the simplest move to refute, we play bishop g4 and we win the queen. That's it. If e d5, we play bishop g4 and win the queen. Fine. If bishop to e2, trying to defend the knight, we play knight g4, bishop g4, and queen h4, and we win the bishop. The only tricky move to see is bishop b5, because it seems that your knight could be loose on h6. So after c6, let's say knight h6. And if you recapture, then white moves the bishop away and everything is fine. But you don't recapture and you don't take on b5, you play queen h4. And now there are no options, basically. If king e2, you have bishop h6. And if king f1, then d4. And this is hard to find. This is engine analysis, but there is no way to defend all of your pieces. For black, this is hanging, f3 is hanging. If they save the bishop, for example, you can just go f3 and try to open things up. If gf3, then bishop h6, and of course black should be winning here with the rook coming to g8. With this bishop being able to go here, it should be over. So yeah, this is a nice trap. Knight h6, which isn't a precise move, but it's not worse than equal. I think after knight h6 and castles, it's equal. It's not worse than that. Okay, the next one is probably the simplest and most famous one. This is sort of the knight d6 trap in the Caro-Kann. This is the 4-move mate trap in the King's Gambit declined, but I still had to show it because, I mean, you have to know this. After bishop c5 declining the gambit, if white is playing the King's Gambit for the first time and they take the pawn, then you simply win with queen h4. And of course king e2 is mate, and g3 wins the rook with queen e4 check. This is a famous pattern which you have to be familiar with. So remember that if you play the King's Gambit and they decline it, think 5 times before grabbing the pawn on e5. Okay, this one I really like. This is another Greco game, although I think it happened in an Alekhine game as well. We are looking at the King's Gambit declined again. So bishop c5, knight f3, d6, c3, queen e7. And this actually happened in a recent game as well. Let me try to find it. Yeah, this actually happened in 12 master games. The highest rated player with white was Peter Martin, which I guess is Slovenian, but I'm not sure. So this is still sort of a theoretical position. d6 is very theoretical, and c3 is more than 200 games. Usually players with black play knight f6, bishop b6, saving or tucking the bishop away is also possible. Bishop g4 is possible. f5 is also possible, but it's very tricky. And queen e7 is the move we are looking at, which, as I said, has been played 14 times on master level, has been played 200 times on Lee chess. And you go d4, attacking the bishop. So they take e d4. By the way, the idea behind queen e7 is to put pressure on e4. So after e takes d4, black thinks he's threatening queen e4, but you just take on d4. And now, of course, bishop b6 is the move. You save the bishop and you're fine. Not bishop b4, because knight c3 develops a piece and the bishop has no future on b4. But if they blunder with queen e4, then white wins. You go king f2, which is incredible. King f2 plus 7. The game is completely over. You have a hanging bishop and you're only a pawn up, so you have to save your bishop. If you play bishop b6, for example, which should be the best move, then bishop b4 check. And the idea is the same. We saw the same idea previously. Rook e1 and mate or winning the queen. So for example, knight c6, rook e1, or c6, rook e1, that doesn't really matter. This is one of my favorites again, and I think it's likely to happen. Queen e7 is a strange move, but it's a very human move because it puts pressure on an undefended pawn. Okay, this one This is the King's Gambit accepted. I don't think the variation has a specific name, but if you know the Queen's Gambit accepted lines for white, then this is going to seem similar. So take the pawn, knight f3, g5, this is the main line, bishop c4, which is slightly strange, but okay, still one of the main moves. And if they try h6, which isn't a good move, you continue h4. And now this is what happens in the Queen's Gambit accepted when they have a pawn on c4, and sometimes you have those queen f3 ideas winning the rook, but sometimes you simply threaten to win the pinned pawn. And after h4, black has to play something normal, like bishop to g7, or just bishop g7 defends everything. But if they try f6, and this is really nice, you don't have, well, your bishop isn't here otherwise, and your queen isn't here, and there's a hole on h7. But if they try f6, there are two really tempting moves. I would like you to calculate both before damn, you can see this on the screen. Oh, maybe you cannot. Okay, I'm not sure how corrupt it is. Calculate knight e5 and knight takes g5 and figure out which is better, which wins, which loses. Okay, pause the video if you want to. Okay, knight g5 doesn't work. Knight g5 doesn't work because you would like to get your queen to h5. That's the idea of mate. Of course, if f takes g5, then you still win. This is forced mate. You just check, and king e7 and queen f7. And this is a common mating pattern, queen d5, king e7 and queen e5. So this sequence of moves, queen h5, king e7, queen f7, king d6, queen d5 and queen e5 is a very common mate, not only in this variation but in many King's Gambit variations, so remember that. However, after knight g5, hg5, black is winning because you don't have a square for your queen, and knight g5 is therefore a huge mistake. However, knight e5 wins in all variations simply because the h5 square cannot be covered. So if knight e5, first let's have a look at h5, which covers the checking square. So this is probably what I would try in a game if I had the black pieces here. If they try h5, then bishop f7 or knight f7 win almost immediately. It should be like plus 20. So bishop f7 check is more forced, I think, so you should go for this. King e7, knight g6 check, they take your bishop, take on h8, and after king g7 you take on h5, and eventually you're going to be winning this position. I think the engine says the best move is g4, that's why I went for that variation, although I'm not sure, but this should be winning enough. Also after h5, if you want to keep it safer, then simply knight f7, and after they move the queen you go knight h8, and again this should be winning. So h5 doesn't work. Taking the knight doesn't work. If they take the knight, then it's the same pattern. We go queen h5, and I hope you remember it by now. Queen e7, king e7, queen f7, king d6, queen d5, king e7, queen e5, mate. Same pattern. And one more move, if they try blocking the bishop instead of the queen to avoid mate, they don't avoid mate because of queen h5. Again, king e7, queen f7, king d6, and we just pick up the pawn, so it's the same thing, king e7. And now we can throw in a knight check somewhere, for example, knight g6, and mate on f7. We could have also played knight c6. No, we actually couldn't have played knight c6 because then the king has the d6 square. So knight g6 is most precise. Okay, so I think if black doesn't have a lot of experience facing the King's Gambit, h6 is a natural bad move, and then f6 is a natural blunder weaker players are going to make. So just remember, not knight takes g5, but knight e5. Okay, the next one comes from the Bishop Gambit, and we are looking at ef4, bishop c4. And if they go queen h4 straight away, king f1. Now, knight f6 is the theoretical move, and I want to say black is slightly better, but I actually prefer white in these positions, because as soon as black plays queen h4, I have this tempo with knight f3, and then I expand with d4, and so on. But it should be about equal. Bishop c5, though, threatening mate in 1 is a mistake, and it's a big mistake. And this, in many King's Gambit variations, is the way to punish bishop c5, and you just go d4. Once the bishop retreats, you go knight f3, and this is why queen h4 is a dubious move. Let's say this is an old move. People don't play queen h4 anymore. They play knight f6. In the game I was looking at knight f3. Well, knight f3 sets up a trap because it threatens to trap the queen, sort of. So black should play a very unintuitive queen f6, and I think this is a very hard move to play because you're running into e5. Still, this is the only move to stay in the game, and this is the only move to keep something close to equality. If you go queen g4, you lose by force, and this again is a very common pattern. I hope you can all see this. Bishop f7. And the reason I'm showing you this trap is because of this pattern. Same as this queen h5, queen f7 stuff. Of course, if king f7, then you win the queen. And if king e7, this is why this one is slightly trickier. You go h3. The queen doesn't really have squares, so it has to go to g3. And now there are two ways to win the queen. You can either do this, or you can do this. So this is another pattern you have to remember. If you have the queen stuck on g3 and these bishop takes f7 sacrifices, then either knight c3, knight e2, or bishop d2, bishop e1. For example, let's look at knight c3, it's the same thing. There is nothing he can do. The best thing to do is actually take the bishop. The point is, even though the g6 square frees up for the queen once you gain a tempo, you have this check. So for example, king takes, knight here and here. It's the same pattern, and this is going to be a recurring theme in King's Gambit games, which is why these traps should really be used. Well, you can use them as traps, but you can also use them as patterns of attack for both colors. Okay, this is a queen trap in the Kieseritzky Gambit, and I think it's a very tempting one. This is in one of the main positions, and we are going to be following Grandmaster games up until move 9, so this is highly likely to happen, and the Kieseritzky is one of the main variations. So ef4, knight f3, g5, h4, g4. Again, if you don't know the Kieseritzky, you can watch my video on it. It's knight e5. Knight f6, knight g4, knight e4. This is all mainline stuff. d3, knight g3, mainline stuff. Bishop f4, mainline stuff. King e7, bishop e2. And in this position, every strong grandmaster is going to play rook g8. It's simply the best move. But if you're playing somebody who doesn't know the Kieseritzky that well, even though they know it up until move 9, they could blunder here. And if they play knight takes h1, that's it. Bishop g5 actually wins the queen. And in one variation it doesn't, in only one, but you get a forced win, which is worst case scenario plus 20. It should be forced mate, but there are so many variations that you cannot expect a forced mate every time. Black will play a weird move you don't know. The point is, after knight takes, the queen is trapped incredibly, and there are only a couple of squares the queen could go to. It could go here or on the diagonal, and that's about it. Queen e6 is the simplest losing move. You simply go knight f6, and this is going to be the pattern. King d8 only move, knight d5 double attack, and once the king moves, we win the queen. So we are going to be looking for this in all the variations. The same goes for queen d6. We have to look at these three moves now. If queen d6, then again knight f6 check. King e7 or king d8 doesn't really matter. You go here, you win the queen. If queen c5, same thing, knight f6 check. Again, doesn't matter where the king goes. We go here, we win the queen. And the only tricky move is queen to b4 check. After c3, which is forced, there are two moves, queen b5 and queen b2. Queen b2 is easy. And after queen b2, you go knight f6 check. They go king d8 or king e7. You go knight d5. They go king e8 and you go knight c7. This is checkmate. So the double threat is to win the queen and to mate. And after, in this position, bishop to e7 instead of king d8. You simply take, and after king to e8, you can go bishop a3 and you win the queen. Because of queen b5, again, knight c7. So queen b2 is kind of easy. Queen b5, as I wrote here, is the only variation where you mate instead of winning the queen, and you go knight f6 check. It's not a forced mate, as I said, but remember the patterns. Knight d5 check, king to d6. The king gets out, which is why it's not easy to checkmate. Now bishop f4 is possible, but I actually prefer c4, and after queen a5 check b4. So this should be the way to checkmate. You only have so many squares to restrict the black king from, so it's not that hard. And this is completely winning, and there are so many variations that I just don't want to go deeper. But yeah, in this position, which is one of the theoretical or the most theoretical positions on move 9 in the Kieseritzky, if they take the rook, they're busted. So you have to know how to punish it. So if they take the rook, bishop g5 wins. Okay, the next one is also in the Kieseritzky, but it's for black. And I like this one a lot. So again, ef4, knight f3, g5, h4, g4, knight e5. We know this. Bishop g7 is not a common move. I mean, it's not that rare. It has been played a couple of times in master games, but most people are going to expect knight f6 or d6. So once you go bishop g7, it actually sets up a trap. White should play d4, just securing the knight and have a normal game. But since you didn't play knight f6, trying to defend this pawn, or d6, chasing the right away, they may just take on g4. They may think it's good. If they take on g4, it's over. You go d5, and I don't know what white should do. Let's turn on the engine, actually. It's not that winning for black. I don't think you can see the evaluation. It's plus 0.8. It says the best move is still pawn to d4, and then you just take the pawn. But if white wants to keep his pawn and they take on d5, then incredibly queen e7 is a winning move. Since you cannot block the checks. If you block the checks with either the queen or the bishop, they are pinned, so you can take the knight for free. And king f2, the only way to try and save the knight, simply fails. Because of bishop d4, king f3 trying to save the knight. Bishop to g4, king takes g4, and now knight f6. And the king is going to be driven into a mating net. Of course, king f3, you have queen e4, so king h3. And now there are many variations, but I think one of the prettier ones is rook to g8, trying to restrict the king further with rook to g3 and threatening knight to g4. So if they make a mistake, like, I don't know, knight c3, then here and here and here. So that's the pattern. In any case, if after bishop g7 they take the pawn, you simply continue d5, and if they take again, you are winning with queen e7 check. Okay, the next one is from the Falkbeer counter gambit. So we are looking at d5, e5, and c6, and queen e2. Now queen e2 is an okay move. It's not the most popular, but many people are going to play it. Okay, and this is still a theoretical position, and it's going to be for a couple of more moves. So c takes d5, queen takes e5 check, bishop to e7, and now bishop b5 should be played. I don't think there are other really good moves. Maybe knight f3 is okay, but I'm not sure. The point is, in this position, which is still theoretical, if black tries to win your rook and takes on g7, it's over. You play bishop f6, and queen g3 is the only move. You have bishop h4. Now this is a simple trap, but for a bullet game, for a blitz game, against lower rated players, this is going to work. Firstly, because people have no idea what the Falkbeer counter gambit is on lower levels. Most of them don't know how to face it. And secondly, because many people are going to be tempted to take on g7. Okay, the last trap I want to show you is a trap Frank Marshall actually fell for in a simul. I can imagine how his opponent, Mr. Young, must have felt. You play against Frank Marshall and you just destroy him. Yeah. Okay, so we have the Lolli Gambit. That's a weird name, but it is called the Lolli Gambit. EF4, knight f3, g5, bishop c4, g4. And most of you probably know the Lolli Gambit, and that's bishop takes f7. This is completely unsound. Black is winning, and it's not even that hard. But black still has to be precise. So you take the bishop, of course. Now the main attempt here is knight e5, but that's, I think, easily refuted with king e8, and then if you take on g4, which again, what else do you do? Then knight f6. And if queen f4, then d6, and black's position is actually fine. You have too many pieces defending around your king. So what Marshall's opponent did is actually a more promising attempt, I think. And that's to castle. Of course, black is completely winning. So gf3 played, queen f3 played, which is correct. Queen f6, which is correct, trying to cover. And this position, if you play bishop takes f7, you are going to get this on the board. I think it's unavoidable, basically, unless black doesn't take your knight, which is absurd. Okay, so d4, this was played, and that's still the best attempt. I mean, you're losing as white, but you want to play it tricky. Queen takes d4, bishop e3. Okay, of course you cannot take the bishop with the pawn because the pawn is pinned. So the queen retreats because the threat is queen f4. Knight c3 getting another piece into play. Knight e7 trying to bring some defenders. Bishop takes f4, and now d6 was played, which is fine. And Marshall's opponent played queen h5, and this is why the position is tricky. What do you actually do? The best way to play this position is queen g6, which seems insane. That just seems insane. If you play queen g6, I would expect many bishop discoveries, and this position should be winning for black incredibly. Bishop takes d6, which I, as a human, just couldn't see. Of course, you're threatening to win the queen or to checkmate, so something has to be done. And his opponent played king to g7, and now, of course, bishop h6. I think this is likely to happen in a game. So let's have a look at that again. So if you want a completely crazy trap, then play the Lolli Gambit and give up the second piece and play this bishop e3 idea. I think if you play bishop takes f7, it's 50-50 that this is going to happen on the board. And knight c3, just bring your pieces in. Maybe black doesn't play knight e7, maybe he plays knight c6 or something, but you can still continue bishop f4 and queen h5. So the idea is to chase the queen away, maybe open up the d file. You can also take on f4 without playing, well, you actually cannot with d3. d3 could be too slow, because black can now do something else, otherwise you were threatening to push with d5. Yeah, okay, these are the traps I wanted to show you. I hope you like them. Again, comment below with which openings you would like to see covered traps and which openings would you like to see covered. And also, the traps I missed, please let me know, paste them below, or email or message me on Lichess. Thank you for watching. Hope you liked the video. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye-bye.